Intuition is a sacred gift. The rational brain is a faithful servant. We live in a society that has forgotten the gift and elevated the servant to the status of king. That's Bob Samples in his book, The Metaphoric Mind, supposedly summarizing Albert Einstein. Let's take this quote line by line. Intuition is a sacred gift. There's a part of a human that is more ethereal and elusive than the rational faculties of the brain. And we have a hard time sort of wrapping our hands around this piece of ourselves. But most would acknowledge that it's there. Some might call it their gut instinct. Others might call it their conscience. Others might call it the universe or God, right? The universe is telling me this or God is telling me this. Of course, within the context of the quote we're focusing on, it's labeled as intuition. And whatever terminology you use, the important thing to note is that it's there. And in the supposedly summarized words of Albert Einstein, it's a sacred gift. A sacred gift in contrast to the rational mind, which is a faithful servant, which is line 2 of the quote. And let's go ahead and toss in line 3 because it helps provide context for the drive or purpose behind the quote. Line 3 states, "We live in a society that has forgotten the gift and elevated the servant to the status of king." Line 3 points toward an imbalance in society, an important one from my perspective. We've become a society obsessed with logic and rationality, with concrete figures, or at least figures that appear concrete. And at the same time, we've forgotten about, or worse yet, we discount less concrete matters like intuition, but also like love, peace, joy, quality, fulfillment. Those things that we all know are the most important in this world, but that can't be neatly defined. We might call them things of the soul or things of the spirit. Again, they're more misty and mushy than their more material and physical counterparts. We believe that if something can't be proved by concrete evidence, it's not real. Many call this science. I'd argue that quality science accounts for the spiritual, less defined realm, but that's another video for another day. Either way, the point is that we've become a society of worshipers of the concrete and critics toward the less concrete, which includes spirituality, poetry, unframed work, or unproductive activity. And it just so happens that the big proponents of concrete evidence are often also the loudest and most obnoxious cheerleaders. So they pump out their opinions and often tout the fact that that which they're in opposition against has no solid proof, which is partially true and partially untrue, right? Can you prove love? Sure, you might be able to prove some different brain waves when someone is in love, but does that prove love? Does it define love? Does that make it any more possible for us to wrap our hands around love? This worship of rationality makes us hard and cold. We discount emotions and their play in the lives of individual human beings and society as a whole. We tell people to suck it up, and if you can't describe it logically, then you don't have a good argument. And in doing this, we discount the full experience of our fellow human beings, and we ourselves become robots who ignore our own emotions and discount our own full experience. The worship of rationality keeps us from chasing soft, warm, lofty ideals. It keeps us from wandering, sauntering, strolling, and enjoying life for the sake of life. It keeps us from simple contemplation, observation, and being still. It keeps us from writing poetry, painting, dancing, singing, being silly, silence, being still, and engaging in activities that feed our soul and the soul of the world. We see no value in these things. They're not concrete. If we can't produce a formula showing how something is productive in a quantitative manner, we discount it as unproductive, and we've done this with some of the best activities life has to offer. And in many ways, it's our disconnection from these spiritual things that has created a depressed, anxious, and suicidal society. We're cutting out a very important part of life. We're cutting out the sacred gift. We're cutting out a way of life, a mindset, and activities that bring life to ourselves individually and to all of humanity. We're following the faithful servant and acting as if he's all there is. This leads to a very shallow life full of activities that aren't high producers of peace, joy, love, and fulfillment. In the long term, it leads to a life of misery. I was in law school back in 2012, and at the time I was struggling with severe anxiety. Anxiety attacks all day, every day, to the point of suicidal thoughts. And as I look back on that time now, it's so clear. I was doing everything right in the eyes of the world, but the life I was living was lacking in depth and substance. I was crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, but I was miserable. Of course, law school teaches a human to be very rational and logical. A good teacher and a good school certainly mention the spirit of the law, but for the young man who never had much introduction to intuition or spiritual matters, it didn't really resonate with me until much later in life. But what I was doing at the time was engaging in a way of life, a way of thinking and activities that were sucking the life out of me. I was fighting, striving, and clawing to climb the ladder because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But I wasn't listening to my heart. I wasn't listening to my intuition. And for me, the first step in injecting life back into my life was to listen to my deeper impulses, right? That still small voice within that was crying out for more, and then to act upon the directives of that voice. This sent me on what has now been a 14-year journey of coming more and more alive, right? Of experiencing greater peace, love, joy, and satisfaction. It requires vulnerability to follow the less concrete. It requires a willingness to appear silly. It requires a willingness to be judged as stupid, immature, or foolish, right? For me, it required transitioning out of law into coaching college football as a guy who never played a down of college football, which required being willing to have my parents, my friends, my law school classmates, and everyone else in the world look at my career decision and think, I think he's lost his mind. It also required me to make myself vulnerable financially. I had to transition from what was likely a minimum of $100,000 per year salary coming out of law school to $3,000 a year in a meal card to coach college football. Of course, as happens when we follow our intuition, incredible circumstances followed my decision to follow my intuition, and I had a full-time salary and benefits within months of becoming a college football coach. But either way, following my intuition required me to make myself vulnerable. In my experience, intuition is our connection to the spiritual realm and what one might call infinite wisdom. Perhaps intuition is infinite wisdom. Intuition is what gives us the directions necessary to travel the path of accomplishing the highest of human aims, which is to become true. As explained in my other video, Be True to Be Original and Be True to Be Set Free. It's to become true or to become one with infinite wisdom, right? That's the goal. And if we're ignoring our intuition, then we're cutting ourselves off from the possibility of ever taking that most important journey. We're cutting off our lifeblood, our connection to the source of power. If we were lamps, it would be like we refuse to plug ourselves in, right? We're still a lamp in that situation, but we're not flowing with vital energy. And there's a huge difference between the human flowing with vital energy and the human who refuses to plug himself or herself in. You can feel the difference in their presence. You can see it in their smile. Christ says, you will know my followers by their fruit. This is the idea I'm getting at. The one following intuition is overflowing with fruit. The fruit of the one who refuses to plug into intuition withers and dies. When we plug into intuition, we receive a download from this source of infinite wisdom, and it's almost felt more than it's grasped in a rational or logical sense, right? It often starts with what one might call an inkling or a gut feeling. It starts in the emotions. But this is where the faithful servant, the rational brain, jumps in. The rational brain helps us navigate the path forward and put skin on the downloads we receive from infinite wisdom through our intuition. It helps us chart the path forward, and all the while, infinite wisdom provides inklings here and there to help the rational brain make course corrections as we go. But let's return to my suicidal days. When I looked within during those days, I found misery, which is a great indicator that a person is not following his or her intuition. And I also found a deep longing for connection and a desire to help the world in a way that fit my passions, interests, and skill set. I couldn't even necessarily put words to all of this at the time, but that's what I was feeling. And the rational brain helped me figure out where I could go that might meet those desires more fully than the current path I was on. It helped me devise a plan to get there. And again, intuition kept providing the downloads as well, right? It would start with a deep emotion, a discontent, an unease, an unsettled feeling, or even an excitement or longing. And the rational brain would then inspect that feeling and the thoughts connected to that feeling to see what was happening and decide where to go from there. In this way, the rational brain is often behind intuition in speed. It often doesn't understand or see what intuition sees until much later than intuition sees it. But here's what most people do in the situation I was in. They just keep pushing forward on the path they're on. They try to bury and ignore those intuitive feelings with drugs, alcohol, sex, workaholism, incessant thinking, or a million other things. They look at the world around them and they see all the smiling faces and they think those deep feelings and inklings are wrong, right? They feel the pressure of a society moving in the direction of the concrete and they fear falling out of line with the status quo. So they remain in their misery and they push the part of them that would set them free deeper and deeper until they become a robot, until the lifeblood has been squeezed out of them and they accept this internal feeling of dissonance as something everyone must accept about life. Let's return to the quote. Intuition is a sacred gift. The rational brain is a faithful servant. We live in a society that has forgotten the gift and elevated the servant to the status of king. Intuition, a sacred gift, a gift from infinite wisdom to be treated as such and not to be buried. The rational brain, a faithful servant not to be demonized, but also not to be kinged, to be used as a tool that helps us follow our intuition. The man who kings the rational brain is a man doomed to concrete misery.